It was a cold afternoon, one of those gray American days when even the sky looks tired. I stood at the front door of my own house, the house I had lived in for over 30 years, holding a small suitcase in my hand. My son Aaron's voice still echoed in my ears, calm, cold, final. "Mom, we can't do this anymore. It's better if you stay somewhere else for a while." He couldn't even look me in the eyes when he said it. His wife stood behind him, arms crossed, pretending to look at her phone. My daughter Lily sat silently on the couch, her head lowered, as if avoiding my pain would make it less real. And Michael, my oldest, he wasn't even there. He had sent a message earlier that morning saying, "Mom, don't make it hard for everyone. It's for the best. For the best." Those words kept circling in my mind like a cruel echo. For whose best? Certainly not mine. I looked around the living room, the same one where I had once watched them take their first steps, where I had celebrated birthdays and holidays, where their laughter once filled every corner. Now it was silent. Even the air felt unfamiliar, like the house had stopped recognizing me. Aaron reached for my suitcase and said, "Come on, Mom, I called you a cab." His voice was soft but firm, the kind of tone people use when they're done arguing. I looked at him, searching for the little boy who used to run into my arms when he was scared. But he wasn't there anymore. "Where will I go?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. He hesitated, then said, "There's a senior facility in town. It's nice. Clean. You'll be comfortable there." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because that was the only thing left to do. "A senior facility?" I said. "You mean an old age home? You want to send me there?" He didn't respond. I turned to Lily. "And you?" I asked. "Do you think that's where I belong?" Tears filled her eyes, but she said nothing. That silence hurt more than words ever could. I felt my chest tighten as I picked up my coat. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay composed. "You don't have to worry," I said quietly. "I won't make it hard for anyone." I walked to the door slowly, feeling each step like a crack in my heart. When I reached the porch, I turned one last time. "You'll understand one day," I said softly, "when you lose something that can't be replaced." No one answered. I stepped outside. The cab was waiting. The driver, a young man with kind eyes, helped me with my bag. I climbed in, and as the car pulled away, I saw Aaron standing in the doorway, watching but not moving. I kept my eyes on him until the house disappeared behind the trees. That was the last time I saw the home where I had poured my entire life. The drive was silent except for the sound of rain tapping against the window. I stared out, watching the world blur by. Familiar streets, grocery stores I used to walk to, the park where I took my kids when they were small. Everything looked the same, and yet everything had changed. When we stopped outside the senior home, I felt my throat tighten again. The building was clean, modern, surrounded by neatly trimmed bushes. It looked like a place designed for comfort, but to me it looked like an ending. I checked in, smiled at the receptionist, signed papers I didn't want to read, and followed a nurse down a quiet hallway. She opened a door and said, "This will be your room, Mrs. Williams." Inside was a single bed, a small window, a dresser, and a chair. That was it. I sat on the bed and looked around. No family photos, no laughter, no warmth. Just walls that smelled faintly of disinfectant and silence that felt like punishment. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the hallway, every sound of footsteps reminded me that I was alone. I thought about calling them, but pride stopped me. I didn't want to beg for love that should have been freely given. I turned toward the wall and whispered, "God, what did I do wrong?" Days passed. Then weeks. The staff was kind enough. Polite smiles, short conversations, but kindness from strangers can't replace family. I watched other residents get visits from their children, saw them laugh together in the garden, hold hands, cry together. No one came for me. My name was never called at the reception desk. Sometimes I would sit by the window watching cars pass on the road outside, wondering if one of them might stop and bring someone back to me. Never happened. One Sunday morning while drinking lukewarm coffee, I overheard two nurses talking. "That lady in room 14, her payments are late again," one of them said. I froze. They were talking about me. I had no idea. I didn't even know who was paying. I assumed my sons were taking care of it, but apparently they had stopped. I sat there in silence, realizing that the small thread connecting me to them was gone. I wasn't just unwanted, I was forgotten. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to die in that room waiting for apologies that would never come. I may have lost everything, but I still had my hands, my will, my faith. And as long as I had those, I could start again. The next morning I packed the little I owned. A few clothes, a family photograph, and my old sewing kit that I had brought along just to feel close to my past. I left a thank you note for the staff and quietly walked out before sunrise. The air was cold, but the world felt open again. I walked for hours, not knowing where I was going. My legs hurt, but I kept moving. I stopped at a small cafe near downtown, the kind of place where people sit with laptops and talk about dreams. I bought a coffee with my last few dollars and sat in a corner. The owner, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, noticed me sewing a loose thread on my coat. "You're good with that needle," she said with a smile. I looked up and smiled back. "I've been sewing since I was 16, I said. "It's the only thing I know how to do well." She nodded. "My sister runs a thrift shop 2 blocks away. She's always looking for someone who can mend clothes. You should talk to her." That's how it began. Not with a grand plan or miracle, but with a simple act of kindness. I walked to the thrift shop that afternoon. The store was small but full of life, racks of used clothes, the faint smell of detergent, and soft music playing from an old speaker. The owner, a woman named Linda, greeted me warmly. "You can sew?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "I can fix, patch, resize, whatever's needed." She gave me a skeptical look but handed me a torn jacket. "Let's see what you can do." I sat at an old machine in the corner, my hands trembling slightly at first, but as I began to stitch, something inside me awakened. The rhythm of the needle, the sound of the fabric coming back together. It felt like healing. Within half an hour, the jacket looked almost new. Linda examined it, raised her eyebrows and said, "You're hired." For the first time in months, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. It wasn't much, just a few dollars a day, but it was mine. Every evening after closing, I would sit by the window of the little back room she let me stay in, counting my earnings, dreaming of something bigger. I didn't know what yet, but I knew I wasn't done. That night, as I lay on the small cot in the corner of the shop, I whispered to myself, "They may have thrown me out, but they didn't end me." And that was true. They had taken my home, but not my spirit. They had taken my comfort, but not my purpose. I would rebuild, not for revenge, not to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that I still could. I closed my eyes, imagining the future. A little store of my own. A place where women like me, forgotten, broken, overlooked, could find not just work but dignity. I didn't know how or when, but deep inside I felt it. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The days that followed were hard, but they gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. Every morning I opened the thrift shop with Linda, sweeping the floor, sorting clothes and repairing torn ones. She was kind, not talkative, but her silence was comforting. She never asked too many questions and I never offered too many answers. I worked quietly, keeping my head down, grateful for every dollar I earned. My hands, though older now, still knew their rhythm. The needle moved through fabric like it remembered every dress I'd ever made, every patch I'd ever sewn for my children when they were little. Sometimes while I worked I thought of them. I tried not to, but a mother's heart doesn't forget so easily. I wondered if they were okay, if they ever thought of me, if they missed me even for a moment. Nights were the hardest. After closing, I'd sit on the cot in the back room, counting my small earnings and thinking about what came next. The sound of traffic outside reminded me that life was moving on. People rushing home to families, warm dinners, laughter. I had none of that, but I still had hope. And hope, I realized, is what keeps people alive when everything else is gone. One evening, Linda came to me with a pile of old coats. "Can you turn these into something new?" she asked. I looked at the coats, faded, torn, but made of good fabric. "Maybe," I said. I stayed up late that night, cutting, stitching, reshaping. I turned one coat into a fashionable short jacket, added some patterns, changed the buttons, and when I was done, it looked brand new. The next day, Linda hung it in the window. A customer bought it within an hour. She came back later and said, "Do you have more like this?" That was the first time I realized I could make something more than just repaired clothes. I could create. Linda was surprised when she saw the sale. "You might be onto something," she said with a grin. From then on, she let me redesign old clothes however I wanted. I started turning old jeans into handbags, men's shirts into stylish tops, and plain dresses into something that looked like boutique wear. People began noticing. They started asking for custom pieces. My name, or rather, the old lady in the back, became a quiet word-of-mouth thing among the customers. Every dollar I earned I saved. I didn't buy new clothes I didn't need out. I saved everything. I kept a small notebook where I wrote every penny I made, every expense. It reminded me that control, even over little things, was power. But life never gives without testing. One evening as I was locking up, 2 men came to the shop asking for Linda. Their voices were loud, angry. I stayed in the back listening. They were debt collectors, the store wasn't doing well, and Linda owed money. When they left, she sat down, buried her face in her hands, and said, "I can't do this anymore, Nausea. They're taking the shop." I felt my heart sink. The shop was my only place, my only security. "What will you do?" I asked. She shrugged. "Maybe I'll go stay with my sister. I'm tired." She handed me a small envelope, my last week's pay. "I'm sorry," she said softly. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I watched as the men came back and put a "for lease" sign on the door. The shop that had become my shelter was gone. I stood there for hours, staring at that empty window, trying to understand how life could strip you of things just when you started believing again. But I had learned something in the past months, that endings could also be beginnings. I took my small bag of clothes and my sewing kit and walked toward the bus station again. I didn't know where to go, but I refused to give up. I found a cheap motel on the edge of town and paid for one night. The room smelled like dust and cigarettes, but it had a small table, a chair, and an outlet for my sewing machine. I plugged it in and looked at it like an old friend. The next morning, I went to a fabric store nearby and asked the owner if he had any scraps he was throwing away. He looked at me curiously but handed me a box full of discarded pieces. "You can take them," he said. I carried that box back to my motel room, spread the pieces on the bed, and began sewing. I made small purses, hairbands, and fabric wallets. Simple things but neat and colorful. The next day, I stood outside the grocery store with my creations displayed on a cardboard box. People passed by without looking, but I smiled anyway. A few women stopped, admired the work, and bought something. By the end of the day, I had made $30. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the next few weeks, that became my routine. I'd wake up early, sew for hours, then stand outside different stores or near the farmer's market selling what I made. Some days were good, some were terrible, but I never stopped. I kept telling myself, one stitch at a time. One afternoon, a woman stopped by my small display. She picked up one of the bags and said, "This is beautiful. Where's your shop?" I laughed softly. "I don't have one," I said. "Just me and my sewing machine." She smiled and gave me her card. "My name's Olivia," she said. "I run a small boutique downtown. I think people would love your designs. Come see me sometime." I went to her boutique 2 days later. It was a cozy little place with soft lights, floral walls, and racks of beautiful clothes. She looked through my samples and said, "These have potential. I'll take 10 pieces to sell here. If they move, we'll talk again." I was over the moon. I spent every night that week sewing, using whatever fabric I could afford. Within a week, all 10 pieces sold. Olivia called me and said, "We need more. Can you keep up?" I could hardly believe it. For the first time in years, I felt useful, alive, needed. I started working double shifts, sewing in the motel room all day, delivering to the boutique in the evenings. Slowly, my savings began to grow. I moved from the motel to a small rented room above an old bakery. The owner, Mrs. Green, was an elderly widow who understood hardship. She gave me a discount on rent and often brought me leftover bread. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," she'd say with a kind smile. I worked harder than I ever had before. My fingers ached, my eyes burned from the dim light, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Every stitch I made felt like a brick in the foundation of the new life I was building. I started experimenting with designs, bold patterns, recycled fabric combinations, things that stood out. Olivia encouraged me to put my own name on the tags. I hesitated at first, then finally wrote it, Nausea Stitch. Soon the name began to spread. People liked the idea. Handmade, repurposed, sustainable fashion by an elderly woman who poured her soul into every piece. One blogger wrote about me, calling me the grandma designer with golden hands. Orders started coming in faster than I could make them. I bought a second-hand industrial machine, hired a young woman named Rosa from the neighborhood to help me, and turned the small room into a buzzing workshop. Every night after Rosa left, I sat by the window and watched the city lights, thinking about how far I had come, from being thrown out of my own home to building something again with my bare hands. I thought about my children. Did they know? Would they care? I didn't know. But I didn't feel hate anymore. Just a quiet sadness mixed with strength. Sometimes, when I delivered finished products to Olivia's boutique, customers would ask to meet the person behind the work. When they saw me, gray hair, wrinkled hands, tired eyes, they were always surprised. Some said I was inspiring. Others said I reminded them of their mothers or grandmothers. Each time I smiled politely, but inside I felt something heal a little more. Months turned into a year. My designs began appearing in other stores across the city. I saved enough to rent a tiny space of my own, barely big enough for 2 tables and a sewing area, but it was mine. I painted the door a soft blue and hung a wooden sign that said Nazia's Touch, handmade with heart. The day I opened it, I stood outside for a long time staring at the sign. The wind was cold, but my heart was warm. I thought about the night I was kicked out of my home, the loneliness, the pain, the fear. And I realized something. Sometimes God takes everything away not to punish you, but to give you the space to build something new. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and turned on the lights. The room glowed softly, and I whispered to myself, "Welcome home." That night I worked late, finishing a batch of dresses for the weekend sale. As I stitched the final seam, I smiled, not because I had succeeded, but because I had survived. And survival, I learned, was the most beautiful kind of victory there is. The morning after I opened my little shop, I stood by the window watching people walk past. Most didn't notice, but some slowed down to look at the sign. My heart beat fast with every passing glance. I had spent the last few nights making sure every piece in the store had a story. A jacket made from repurposed denim, a floral dress from vintage curtains, a purse from old leather jackets. Each one carried a memory, a bit of my journey. The first customer came around noon. She was a young woman in her 20s, holding a cup of coffee and scrolling on her phone. She stepped inside, looked around, and said, "This place feels cozy." I smiled and said, "Everything here is made by hand. Nothing is wasted, and every piece is unique, like people." She laughed softly and picked up a bag. "This is beautiful. I'll take it." It wasn't about the $45 she paid. It was about the way my heart swelled as I wrapped it for her, realizing I had just made my first sale in a shop that was mine. When she left, I locked the door, sat down behind the counter, and cried quietly. Not from sadness this time, but from pride. Days turned into weeks, and the shop slowly became part of the neighborhood. People began stopping by regularly, asking what was new, bringing old clothes for me to transform. A local journalist came by one afternoon after hearing about the grandmother boutique owner who turns trash into treasure. She asked for my story, and I told her, not everything but enough. The next week, there was an article in the city paper titled, "From Homeless to Hope, the woman behind Nazia's Touch." The following morning, I opened my shop to find 3 women waiting outside. "We read about you," one of them said. "We wanted to see your work." That day, I sold more than I had in a whole month. It felt unreal. People were appreciating not just my products but my journey. They looked at me and saw strength, not pity. Soon local stores started asking if they could stock some of my pieces. Olivia, the same woman who gave me my first chance, came by with a big smile. "You're becoming a star, Nazia," she said. "How does it feel?" I smiled. "It feels like a dream I never dared to dream. But success never comes without its price." With more orders came more pressure. I worked from dawn till midnight, barely eating or resting. Rosa, my young assistant, often begged me to take a break. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she'd say. But I'd shake my head. When you've lost everything once, you work twice as hard to keep what you build. There were nights when my hands cramped so badly, I couldn't even hold the needle. I'd sit there massaging them, whispering prayers, asking for strength. And somehow the next morning I'd start again. One day, a man named Ethan came into my shop. He was tall, well-dressed, and carried a leather folder. "I represent a regional fashion fair happening next month," he said. "We're inviting small designers with unique stories to showcase their work. Would you be interested?" I hesitated. I had never thought of myself as a designer. I was just a mother who knew how to sew. "I don't know," I said quietly. He smiled. "Your story deserves to be seen. You don't need to compete. Just show who you are." For the next month, I worked harder than ever. I created 20 new designs, dresses, jackets, and handbags, each inspired by different moments in my life. One was made from an old blanket I used when I slept in that shelter. Another was a dress stitched from leftover fabric from the thrift store days. Every piece carried a part of me. When the day of the fair came, I stood in a corner of the exhibition hall surrounded by young designers with bright lights and expensive setups. My booth was simple, just a wooden rack, a small sign, and my clothes hanging neatly. I felt out of place, but I reminded myself that I didn't come from their world. I had built my own. People started walking by, stopping to look. Some just smiled politely and moved on, but others stayed longer asking questions. I told them about sustainable fashion, about giving old materials a second life, and somehow they listened. By evening, my small booth was crowded. A local TV station even interviewed me. I spoke softly, my hands trembling, but my words came from the heart. When the fair ended, I had sold almost everything. Ethan came over and said, "You stole the show without even trying." I laughed, unsure what to say. He handed me his card. "Call me if you ever want to expand." That night, I went home exhausted but full of gratitude. I sat by my sewing machine, touched the fabric, and said a quiet thank you to the universe. I didn't have much, but I had purpose, dignity, and peace, things I once thought I'd never have again. Over the next year, Nazia's touch grew. I hired 2 more women, both single mothers trying to make ends meet. I trained them, taught them everything I knew. "So with love," I told them. "People can feel it even if they don't see it." Together, we turned that tiny shop into a humming little factory of hope. Then one day, while checking my emails, I saw a message from a big retailer in New York. They wanted to carry a limited collection of my designs under their local creators program. I couldn't believe it. I read it 3 times to make sure it wasn't a mistake. Traveling to New York was like walking into another world. Skyscrapers, flashing lights, endless people. Everything was bigger than life. But even there, in that crowd, I felt small but not insignificant. I met their team, presented my samples, and told them my story. They listened, nodded, and said, "We'd be honored to partner with you." On my flight back home, I looked out the window at the clouds below and thought about the day I was thrown out of my home. I remembered standing in the rain, holding my bag, thinking life was over. And now here I was, flying back from New York with a contract in my purse and hope in my heart. When I landed, Rosa was waiting for me with flowers. "We did it," she said, tears in her eyes. I hugged her tightly. "No," I whispered. "We're just getting started." As the months passed, my boutique became more than a business. It became a symbol. Women came to me not just to buy clothes but to talk, to share, to learn. I started small sewing workshops for women who wanted to start their own businesses. I taught them how to stitch, how to budget, how to dream again. Watching them grow gave me joy I couldn't describe. But as success grew louder, so did silence from my children. I never heard from them. Not a single call, not a letter. Part of me hoped that maybe they didn't know, that maybe one day they'd walk through that door and say, "Mom, is that really you?" But years went by and nothing happened. Sometimes at night, when I locked up the shop and sat alone in the quiet, I thought about them. I wondered if they were happy, if they ever thought of me when they saw someone wearing my designs on TV or online. I didn't hate them anymore. Life had softened the sharp edges of my pain. I had learned to forgive silently, even without apology. Still, a mother's heart doesn't stop hoping. And then one evening something happened that would change everything again. A young man came into the shop just as I was closing. His clothes were worn, his eyes tired. He looked around for a moment, then stopped when he saw me. You're Nazia?" he asked softly. I nodded, not recognizing him. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "My name is Adam. I'm your grandson." When he said those words, "I'm your grandson," I felt the world stop. The sound of the street outside faded. The ticking clock on the wall went silent. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I looked at him closely, really looked, his eyes, his face, his voice. There was something familiar there. Something that stirred a memory deep inside me. "You're your grandson?" I repeated softly, my voice trembling. He nodded, his eyes wet. "Yes, ma'am. My mother's name is Sarah." "Sarah. My daughter." The same daughter who once told me that I was a burden, that I had no place in her home, who had turned her face away as I walked out into the rain years ago. Hearing her name again after all this time felt like reopening a wound that had only just healed. I didn't know what to say. I just stared at him. This young man, probably in his mid-20s, with messy brown hair and tired eyes. How did you find me?" I asked quietly. He took a deep breath. "We saw you on TV, Grandma. My mom, she saw your interview. She didn't say much, but I could tell she recognized you. I did too. I saw old photos of you when I was little. I had to come." I felt my throat tighten. "How is she?" He looked down, rubbing his hands together nervously. "Not good," he said finally. "None of them are. My mom's business went bankrupt 2 years ago. My dad left. She's been struggling. Uncle David lost his job and started drinking. Uncle Mark, he's in debt. Everything fell apart after Grandpa died." I closed my eyes for a moment. The words hit me like waves, not out of revenge or satisfaction but sorrow. I had built my peace away from them, but hearing about their pain reopened every memory of that night. They turned me away. I whispered, "So much has changed." Adam nodded. "When Mom saw your story, she cried. She said she didn't deserve to see you again. She wanted to come but didn't have the courage. I told her I would find you." He paused, looking around the shop. "This place, it's beautiful. You did all this by yourself." I smiled faintly. "With God's help and with these old hands." I looked at my fingers, the wrinkles, the calluses. Every stitch has a story. He smiled sadly. "She should have been here to see this." I didn't know what to say, so I invited him to sit. I made tea, something I hadn't done for family in years. We sat quietly, sipping it. He told me about their lives, about how my daughter had tried to keep things together, but everything kept slipping through her fingers. How the house that once seemed so proud now stood half empty and cold. As he spoke, I saw not punishment but pain. They were suffering, not because I cursed them or wished them ill, but because life had taught them the same lessons it once taught me: humility, loss, and the value of love. "Do they know you came here?" I asked. He nodded. "They do. They begged me not to upset you. But I told them you had a right to know." I looked out the window for a moment, the evening light fading behind the city buildings. Then I said quietly, "Tell your mother she's welcome here. Whenever she's ready." Adam's eyes filled with tears. "She won't believe that." I smiled gently. "Then tell her anyway." That night, after he left, I sat alone in the shop long after closing. I stared at the clothes hanging on the racks, at the name Nausea's touch glowing faintly above the door. My life had come full circle, from rejection to success and now back to family. The next few days were heavy with silence. Every time the doorbell rang, my heart jumped, half expecting to see her. But it was always customers, deliveries, neighbors, never her. Then one afternoon, as I was helping Rosa pack an order, the bell rang again. I turned and there she was, Sarah. She looked older, thinner, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the city outside, the hum of the sewing machine, everything seemed far away. Finally, she whispered, "Mom." I froze. That word, the one I thought I'd never hear again from her lips, broke me. I dropped the fabric from my hands and took a shaky step forward. She started crying before I could even say anything. "I'm sorry," she said through her tears. "I'm so sorry. I was stupid and selfish and blind. You didn't deserve what we did to you." I reached out and touched her face. Her tears felt warm against my fingers. "Shh," I whispered. "It's all right now." "No, it's not," she cried. "You were right there, living, fighting, building everything, and we didn't even check if you were alive. We were so lost, so busy trying to prove we didn't need you. But we did. We always did." I pulled her into my arms. For a long time we stood there, mother and daughter, crying in the middle of that little boutique that had been built from pain, faith, and second chances. After a while she sat down, wiping her face. I made tea again, just like old times. She looked around, her eyes full of wonder. You really built this all on your own? I smiled. Not on my own. God sent people to help. A kind stranger, a woman named Linda, a girl named Rosa, a friend named Olivia. Every person along the way was part of the story. She nodded slowly, then said, I don't deserve your kindness. I looked at her gently. Maybe not. But forgiveness isn't about what people deserve. It's about freeing your own heart. That night, Sarah stayed with me in the small apartment above the shop. We talked for hours about the past, about her brothers, about everything we had both lost and learned. She told me about how her brothers regretted everything, how they had argued for years over who was to blame. They want to come, she said quietly, but they're afraid you'll turn them away. I chuckled softly. Funny how life teaches us all humility in the end. A week later my sons came. They didn't come together, first David then Mark, both looking broken, humbled, smaller than I remembered. They couldn't even meet my eyes at first. David spoke first. Mom, I don't even know where to start. I thought I was doing what was right, building my business, taking care of my family. I told myself I didn't need anyone. But when everything fell apart, I realized the only person who ever stood by me was the one I threw away. Mark followed, his voice trembling. I was the worst of all. I said things I can't take back. I was cruel. I was proud. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I looked at them, my children, once so proud, now standing before me as lost souls. And in that moment I didn't see the pain they caused. I saw the babies I once held, the children I once taught to walk, the family I once dreamed of keeping together. I walked toward them slowly, and they both stepped back unsure. But then I opened my arms. Come here, I said softly. They didn't hesitate, they rushed forward, and we embraced, crying, shaking, holding on to each other as though we'd found something we'd thought was gone forever. The years between us melted away in that moment. I forgave them, truly forgave them, not because they deserved it but because love is stronger than pain. Afterward, I invited them upstairs. We ate together for the first time in years, bread, soup, and tea. Nothing fancy, but it felt like a feast. They told me about their lives, about their mistakes, and about how much they wanted to make things right. Before they left, I said something I had carried in my heart for a long time. Children, what you did broke me once. But what you've done today, coming here, standing before me with honesty, that healed me. Don't waste the time we have left. Family isn't about being perfect. It's about being together when everything else falls apart. They nodded, tears still in their eyes. And as they walked out, I felt peace settle inside me like never before. That night I stood by the window again, looking at the city lights. The world looked the same, but I felt different. I had walked through betrayal, loneliness, and struggle, and had come out not bitter but blessed. Sometimes life doesn't give you happy endings. It gives you second chances, and if you're brave enough to take them, they can be even more beautiful. The morning after my children came back into my life, I woke up before the sun rose, as I always did. But that day felt different. The air was softer, lighter somehow. I brewed tea and stood by the window of my little apartment above the shop, watching the quiet street below. The world was waking up, and so, in a way, was my family. For years I had prayed for that moment, to hear my children say my name, not with anger, not with pride, but with love. And now that it had finally happened, I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it heals it. Later that morning my daughter Sarah came by with Adam. They brought breakfast, fresh bagels, fruit, and coffee. We thought we'd surprise you, Adam said with a grin. I smiled. I've had enough surprises for a lifetime, but this one I'll take. We ate together, laughing softly between stories. For the first time in decades I felt what home truly meant. Not a house, not walls or furniture, but hearts finally finding their way back to one another. In the days that followed, my children visited often. David helped fix up the boutique storage room. Mark offered to manage the small online side of the business, and Sarah began helping with the shop displays. They wanted to make up for the years lost, to show me that they were ready to be a part of my life again. At first, I hesitated to let them in fully. There was a quiet fear in me, the fear that this piece was fragile, that one wrong word could break it. But every time they came with humility. There were no demands, no arrogance, no guilt thrown around. Just presence, love, and effort. Rosa watched all this with tears in her eyes. You got your family back, she said one evening as we closed the shop. I smiled gently. I didn't get them back, I said. We found each other again. That's not the same thing. Months passed and slowly the distance between us shrank. We began celebrating small things, birthdays, anniversaries, even just good sales at the shop. The boutique became a gathering place for us. Laughter echoing where once there had been only silence. I started noticing changes in them too. David stopped drinking. Mark began mentoring young entrepreneurs at the community center. Sarah volunteered at a shelter for women, teaching them how to start small sewing businesses. You inspired me, she told me one night as we sat together in the empty shop after closing. I want to help others the way you helped yourself. Hearing those words filled me with pride. That's how life works, my dear, I told her. Pain, when shared with purpose, becomes healing for someone else. As Nazia's touch grew, people started coming from other cities, not just to buy clothes but to meet me. They called me Grandma Nazia. Some came seeking fashion advice, others just wanted to talk. I became something of a symbol, not of success but of resilience. One afternoon, a local university invited me to speak to a class of young business students. I hesitated at first. I wasn't educated, I didn't have fancy words. But they insisted, saying they wanted to hear my story. So I went. Standing in front of those bright young faces, I told them everything. The night I was kicked out, the years of struggle, the tiny motel room, the sewing machine, the first sale, the fair, and finally the reconciliation with my children. The room was silent the whole time. When I finished, one student asked, "If you could change anything about your life, what would it be?" I smiled and said, "Nothing. Not even the pain. Because without it, I would never have discovered my strength. Life doesn't always go as planned, but it always goes as it must." Every fall I took pushed me toward the woman I was meant to become. After that day, more invitations came, radio shows, local events, community gatherings. My story spread beyond fashion. It became a message of hope. People started calling the boutique not just a store, but a house of healing. As years passed, my hair grew whiter, my hands slower. Rosa had her own small workshop by then, and Sarah helped me run the store full-time. My sons managed the finances and supply chain. We had become not just a family again but partners in purpose. On my 75th birthday, they threw a surprise celebration. The shop was filled with balloons, flowers, and laughter. Customers, neighbors, friends. Everyone who had been a part of my journey came. Olivia, the woman who first gave me a chance, was there too. She hugged me and said, "You've come a long way, my friend." I smiled and said, "We both did. You believed in me when no one else did." As the night went on, I looked around at my children, my grandchildren, my friends, and I realized how full my life had become. There had been a time when I had nothing but my will to survive. And now I had everything that truly mattered. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the quiet shop, the soft light from the street falling through the window. I looked at the sewing machine, old, worn, but still working, and placed my hand on it. "We did it," I whispered. "You and I." A few weeks later, Adam came to me with an idea. "Grandma," he said, "we should open a second branch, maybe near the city center. There are so many people who want to support sustainable fashion, and your story inspires them." I laughed softly. "At my age, I'm thinking of slowing down, not expanding." He grinned. "Then let me do it. Let us continue your legacy." I thought about it, then nodded. "All right. But remember, this isn't about money. It's about meaning. If you ever forget that, you'll lose what makes it special." He promised he wouldn't. And so, Nazia's touch grew again, this time led by the next generation. Adam handled marketing, Sarah managed the designs, and I stayed in the background, watching proudly as the brand became something far bigger than I ever imagined. Years went by. My steps grew slower, my days quieter. I spent more time sitting by the window, sewing smaller pieces, mentoring women who came to learn. The shop had become a place of stories, each thread a memory, each design a message. One evening, Sarah sat beside me as I finished stitching a scarf. "Mom," she said softly, "you've built something that will outlive all of us. How does that feel?" I smiled, tying the final knot. "It feels like peace." She took my hand, her eyes full of love. "We don't deserve you." I shook my head. "No, my dear. You do. Because you learned. Because you came back. Because you chose love when you could have stayed lost." As the sun set outside, casting golden light across the shop floor, I looked at the clothes, the walls, the sewing table, and then at my daughter. "Do you know the most important lesson I learned?" I asked. She shook her head. "That sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who need your love the most. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's knowing that carrying hate only burns your own heart." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I continued, "And one more thing. Never let anyone tell you it's too late to start over. I lost everything when I was old, but I built everything that mattered after that. The world only gives up on you when you give up on yourself." That night I went to bed with a full heart. My journey had come full circle. From rejection to redemption. From loneliness to legacy. I had forgiven, rebuilt, and taught others to believe again. And if there's one thing I wanted the world to remember from my story, it's this. Life will break you down to your smallest pieces. It will strip away your pride, your comfort, your security. But if you have faith, if you work with your hands and your heart, and if you never stop believing in love, you can build yourself again, stitch by stitch, until you become something stronger, softer, and infinitely more beautiful than before. As the years went by, time moved slower for me. The mornings came gentler, the nights quieter. I still woke up early, out of habit, brewed my tea, and sat by the same window that had witnessed my life unfold. From heartbreak to hope, from rejection to renewal. The shop downstairs had changed so much since the day I first opened it. It wasn't just Nazia's touch anymore. It had become something bigger. The sign outside now read, "Nazia's Legacy Boutique. Founded with faith and forgiveness." Every time I saw it, my heart swelled with a feeling words couldn't capture. Adam and Sarah had taken over most of the work. Adam was a natural leader, calm, respectful, and kind. He brought in new ideas, online sales, partnerships, sustainable fabrics, and even an annual charity event in my name. The Stitch of Hope Project, which helped women coming out of shelters start small sewing businesses. Sarah handled the creative side, designing clothes that carried stories. Each collection had meaning, second chances, roots of resilience, threads of grace. She told me, "Mom, these aren't just clothes. They're reminders." And I smiled every time because that's all I ever wanted, to remind people that pain can bloom into purpose. David and Mark, my sons, had found their peace too. David ran a small home renovation business, now sober and proud. Sometimes he'd fix up old furniture for the boutique. Mark had become a counselor at a local recovery center, helping men find stability again. He told me once, "Mom, when I see someone lost, I think of how lost I was, and how you never stopped believing I could find my way back." That was enough to heal the last cracks in my heart. I often sat in the back of the boutique, sewing small things, scarves, patches, delicate embroidery. Customers would come in and ask, "Are you the Nazia?" And I'd smile shyly and say, "I suppose I am." Then they'd tell me how my story inspired them. Women who'd left bad marriages, men who'd lost jobs and rebuilt, young people chasing their dreams. Sometimes I'd get emotional, hearing how a little boutique in a quiet corner of a small American town had touched lives across the country. But that's the thing about stories. Once you share them with truth, they travel further than you ever can. One winter evening, I remember sitting by the fireplace in my home, the home my children had built for me near the boutique. Snow was falling outside, soft and slow. My grandchildren played on the floor, building a small fabric fort with leftover scraps from the shop. "Grandma," little Emma said, "why do you still sew if you're already famous?" I laughed softly, touching her cheek. "Because sewing reminds me who I am, my love. Every stitch is a prayer. Every piece a memory. When I sew, I'm not famous. I'm just me." She thought for a moment, then asked, "Do you forgive Mommy and uncles for being mean to you?" The room went quiet. My children looked at me, their faces filled with love and regret, though the years had long washed away the bitterness. I looked at my granddaughter and smiled. "Yes, my dear. I forgave them a long time ago. Because forgiveness is the only way to keep your heart light enough to love again." Emma nodded, not fully understanding yet, but one day she would. Time passed. The boutique grew and my health slowly began to fade. I felt it in my bones, the gentle slowing, the quiet exhaustion. But I wasn't afraid. I had lived through the worst life could throw at me and turned it into something beautiful. I had seen my children lost and then redeemed. I had seen love die and then be reborn stronger. One morning I called all my children to the shop. I wanted to tell them something important. They came worried, thinking maybe I was unwell. But I smiled and said, I just wanted to remind you all why we're here. We sat together surrounded by racks of clothes, soft music playing in the background. This place, I said, was never about fashion or money. It was about hope. I want you to promise me that no matter how big this gets, you'll never forget the heart of it. Kindness, forgiveness, and giving others a chance. They promised, their eyes wet with emotion. That evening I watched them lock up the boutique together. The same boutique that had once been my refuge now belonged to them, and to everyone who believed in second chances. That night as I lay in bed I thought about my journey. I thought about the night I was kicked out, standing on the porch with my bags, feeling like the world had ended. I thought about the little motel room, the sewing machine humming through my tears. I thought about Rosa, about Olivia, about every person who gave me a hand when I had nothing left. And most of all, I thought about my children. The same ones who had once turned me away, now surrounding me with love, care, and respect. Life had a funny way of healing itself. Weeks later, on a quiet spring morning, I didn't wake up. My children found me sleeping peacefully, a small smile on my face, my hands folded over a piece of fabric I had been stitching. A delicate heart made of gold thread. On it, I had embroidered just one word. Forgiven. They cried, but they also smiled, because they knew I had left the world exactly as I wanted to. At peace, surrounded by love, my story complete. After my funeral, they decided to close the boutique for a week. When they reopened, they held a ceremony and unveiled a new sign above the door. Nazia's legacy, built with forgiveness, stitched with love. They turned my old sewing machine into a display piece near the entrance, with a plaque that read, "She was kicked out of her house but built a home for countless hearts. Her strength became our foundation, her love our fabric." Every year after that, on the anniversary of my passing, the family held an event at the boutique, the Nazia Day of Giving, where they donated clothes and offered free sewing lessons to women starting over. The store became a beacon of compassion, a place where broken hearts found hope again. My grandchildren grew up hearing my story, not as a tragedy but as a tale of triumph. Emma, the curious little girl who once asked about forgiveness, grew up to become a designer herself. She carried my values in every design, saying, "My grandma didn't just teach me to sew. She taught me how to mend clothes, lives, and hearts." And so, even long after I was gone, my voice remained. In the soft hum of sewing machines, in the laughter echoing through the boutique, in the gentle kindness of every customer who walked through those doors. Because stories don't end when we do. They live on in the people we touch, the love we give, and the forgiveness we choose. If you ever walk down a small American street and see a cozy little shop called Nazia's Legacy Boutique, step inside. You'll see my sewing machine in the corner, a cup of tea on the counter, and maybe, just maybe, you'll feel the warmth of a grandmother's love stitched into every thread. And if you listen closely, you might hear my whisper in the air. Forgive. Begin again. And never stop believing in yourself, even when no one else does.